Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast, hosted on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am their host, like every Monday, Ethan Orfe, and we're in for a decent one today, folks. We have a few things to talk about. Colorado has found their head coach, and to talk about some XFL effects on the college football atmosphere, some top 25 stuff, some sleepers, and some pretenders. Draft guys all around, because the draft is coming up ever so soon, just around the corner, so we're going to be talking about that. And then some college football winningness programs of all time, so we're going to start looking at some lists like that near the end of the podcast. But first, let's get into the Colorado coach hiring. So Colorado Buffaloes, they find their head coach. They hire Carl Dorrell, who was assistant coach for the Miami Dolphins, just recently hired as the assistant coach, actually, only 2 days afterwards. It seems coaching carousel just never stops going, huh? So the coaching carousel comes again. He was hired just after 2 days of the Miami Dolphins making him the wide receivers coach. He was Colorado's wide receivers coach in 1992 to be exact, and in 95, he was their offensive coordinator from 98. So for 3 years, he's familiar with this program to a certain extent. It's been quite some time. Head coaching stint at UCLA from 2003 to 2007, and he was the Pac-10 Coach of the Year in 2005 when UCLA went 10-2. So to put this all into a little bow of perspective, the Colorado Buffaloes have not been grazing much in the decade and a half, essentially. So in 14 seasons, they've only had one winning season. And since then, I believe that was in 2004 that they've been in a bowl game and won one, to be exact. So they have not been good for quite some time. And, recently they've been, tied to this whole coaching hiring debacle that's been plaguing college football for a little while now, where guys are just spending money left and right and taking coaches and hiring guys that may not have the resume or may not have this, that, or that, credentials to be order to get the jobs that they're getting, and they're just taking them because the money is there. And they don't care about if it's going to ruin their reputation or not, or if it's designed for them to fail. And that's how I picture this for the Michigan State hire, because I just don't see why you turn something down first, and then all of a sudden some more money comes around and you just can't turn it away. So, he knew what he was getting into the first time. This doesn't change. The money is the only thing that changed. So in reality, I felt bad for the Colorado program because, you wanted to bring back your head coach. You thought that he could move the program in a different direction, and then he kind of gets stolen. It's kind of like how in professional sports where you have big markets, small markets, it's all the same thing. Big markets are poaching small markets and stealing talent or stealing coaches or, anything like that. And they take, and it feels like the parity between the small markets and big markets just seem to get wider and wider as the years go by. And it's starting to affect all different types of sports. So college football is no exception of it. Small markets have a lot of hardships when it comes to recruiting and bringing guys in, especially in-state guys who could be really, really good. Other teams or other programs from surrounding areas who have more name to them, have more prowess, prestige. They tend to try and get there before you can, and you live there. So, or it doesn't matter how fast you get there. It's just you're not the Oregon of the Pac-12. You're not even UCLA of Pac-10. It's not. You're not a big name. Colorado, you're maybe Division I, but you haven't been good for 14 years. So a lot of these guys who have, I guess, grown up watching college sports have probably barely watched you play or barely seen you do anything significant for X amount of years. So when you look at it from that perspective, what have you shown them that they can do besides maybe make a name for themselves? Like maybe a quarterback. Quarterbacks, I feel, is always different because you can kind of get drafted kind of anywhere playing quarterback as long as you're in Division I and you have some sort of presence and you're one of the power schools. But every other position is it can be kind of detrimental if you don't play at a bigger school to get noticed and get more scouts to look at you. And that's just kind of how it ends up being sometimes. So that's why a lot of really good wide receivers come out of the Pac-12, and that's why, and recently a lot of big wide receivers come out of the SEC because they're getting the quarterbacks now. And ACC has been known to deliver a whole plethora of players over the past few years from different programs. So Florida State likes to ship a lot of NFL talent. Of course, Clemson. And then you have the Big Ten, of course, where they just have the Michigan, Ohio State, and Michigan State for a little while. They were shipping out players left and right as well. So it's still a very power-heavy, top-heavy sort of place to deliver talent in this business. And to be able to be noticed and really, really get your draft stock as high as possible. Go into a place where people are going to notice you and going to watch you play, and it isn't going to be a afterthought when all said and done. And you have to go try and make a name for yourself in the draft combine, pro days, and stuff like that. Going to a big school matters a lot. So I say all this to say that I think this can be really good for Colorado to set a new precedent for themselves. To me, this feels like a bit of a low point for the program to lose your head coach like that after not. I mean, it wasn't like he brought it up and turned it around and got you guys to a bowl game or anything like that. You were just poached. So it'd be really interesting to see if the Colorado can pull it around and really turn this into a feel good and have a good season next year. To be like, hey, you may have decided to go to a bigger school, but we had a good season and we're still believing in ourselves to be able to turn something around and make something out of this and make our program have a bigger name. Because, I mean, they're in the national news for college football because of Michigan State and what they've been doing. So involuntarily, so in reality, you have a little bit of, I guess, notoriety now. And people are going to probably start watching Colorado just to see how the adjacent effects have happened because of this whole coach poaching business. So if Colorado can show that, they can hang with people, that's going to be really good for them. So I like to see what they can do. So I think they can take this opportunity. You can look at this as a silver lining opportunity to really change some things in the college football atmosphere about your program. So Colorado, let's see it. But we're going to take a break here, and we're going to get into some XFL.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So the XFL has had 3 weeks thus far by the time I'm recording this, so you've seen a good amount of what this league has to offer, what it's planning to offer, and what it possibly could be leading up in the future. And it's been talked about a bit about its first week was a big rush, and then the second week was kind of what our expectations should be for the league going forward and how to look at it. And then the third week is kind of more the same as the second week. And you're starting to see what teams are looking like as fleshed out, I guess, commodities and products, and what the whole package is looking like as well. And we typically, a lot of guys try to compare it more to the NFL than the college football because it's technically a professional league, but it does have a lot of college standouts from their collegiate days, or a lot of guys who were, I guess, one contract and done type of players in the NFL, and they never got back to the league. So I think it's interesting to look at it from the college football fan perspective, if there's anything to watch it for, and what exactly it means for the college football sport in general, because let's face it. I don't typically I would not jump to conclusions, but I do not think the XFL is going to cause college football to look at its structure and expedite the process to compensate college football players any faster than what they're going now, which is a molasses pace, as we talked about last week during the summit, where they were talking about talking to lawmakers and congressmen, things like that. So, with that being said, the idea that the XFL and college football can coexist and be good for college football fans is something I am quite interested in, because sometimes there are guys in college football who are maybe not NFL guys, right? I mean, it's a lot of people who play college football. It's a lot of people who have got a full ride to go to school, went to a Division I college, played all 4 years, got their college degree, and maybe they still want to play ball, and they still have the heart to do it, but they're just not league ready. And or they don't get drafted, and they go undrafted, and they're trying to get on practice squads and things like that, but it's not working out. And you see this league come up and about, and you look at it like this. I can make a name for myself. I can get some TV exposure to guys who either are not really big fans of the NFL, maybe they don't like the presentation of the NFL, maybe they don't even like the supporting the shield as much as, maybe a lot of college football guys don't like the NFL that much. They feel like the guys don't play as hard, or it doesn't feel as genuine, or there's not as much excitement that a college football atmosphere can bring compared to the NFL, or, their affiliation to college is because they went to the school, or however you look at it from that perspective. So a lot of guys don't actually like watching the NFL as much as they do college football. But if you have these guys who are really big in college football, and guys that familiar names that they can remember, someone like a Cardale Jones, and you look at it, look how much he has kind of become the shining star of the league, excluding PJ Walker. So like the two quarterbacks that people really talk about in the league is Cardale Jones and PJ Walker, and then there's everybody else. But he's a big Ohio State guy, and people love Ohio State. They have fans all over the country. People jump up and down about Ohio State year round. Their fans can be a little bit obnoxious, and they're one of the bigger, I guess, talking points in college football year in, year out. So even when it didn't work out in the NFL, people still want to support Cardale Jones no matter where he's at. And if he's doing something positive with himself, it's not like he's over there, it's not like he's down bad somewhere or doing something that he's not supposed to do. He's just playing football in a different league. It's nowhere different and it's more accessible than the Canadian Football League. And even though the Canadian Football League has been way more established, or maybe the Arena League has been way more established, it's more accessible. It's on mainstream television networks. It's on FS1. It's on ESPN. It's on Fox. It's delivered in a package that is familiar enough for fans to watch, understand, and get, while also trying to do a lot of newer things, like bringing in ref mics to hear what the refs are talking about directly from them. There's no disconnect. You hear what they're thinking. You hear them talking to each other, talking things out on calls. You hear players on the mic. You hear what they say, even sometimes to the dismay of fans, that sometimes players say some things that they don't necessarily need to hear, but it's there for the time being. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's what happens when you start a new league. You have to try things, and you have to deal with the initial mistakes so you can fine tune it. But for majority of the fans who have stuck around for the 3 weeks, it's working for them. They like the product. The product seems cool. It seems different enough for people to see it as its own thing, while also saying that it's football enough for it to feel legitimate. And I think college football fans can get along with that if that means more talent to come into the XFL will primarily be guys who are trying to get into the NFL bubble that aren't already NFL level talent. Because I have a hard time believing that NFL level talent will find themselves in this league, I guess, too early or too soon. Like guys who are NFL level talent, but maybe they have a history with staying on the field, either be injury or off the field issues. Maybe they find themselves in the XFL to try and rekindle that. But guys who I have a hard time seeing, like a high schooler who has no interest in playing college ball and decides, this is it for me. I'm going to go to the XFL. Granted, you can't do that right now currently, how the rules are set up, but there could be a chance for that rule to change at some point in the near future, and that's the kind of the talking point of XFL and what it could mean later down the line, or at least where I'm getting at is it could be a league where the potential is the league could be a farm system for the NFL, like college is, without dealing with the college football, I guess, politics and things that go around with it, as far as players not being able to make money off their likeness and stuff like that. And granted, there may not be as much money, not nearly as much money as there could be playing in NFL, and there may not be as much quote unquote money to be made future wise, investment wise, as playing in a major Power 5 college football. So that's why, and it's not even an argument, it's truth. You play at Alabama for 3 years, 4 years, the likelihood and you're good, the likelihood is you'll get way more stock in your draft, endorsement deals, and companies will look at you, will know you way better than somebody who plays on the XFL team. Because even now I struggle myself to start naming these guys off the top of my head because I'm just not as familiar with them as I would like to be. And, that takes time to grow a household name. And the XFL is not something that gets shot in your face every week like the NFL does 24/7 year round, or maybe college football does year round. So that's just what I've been thinking about it. So maybe it can work out for, if you're a college football fan, maybe you should check it out if you've been on the fence. All right, so let's take another break, and then we're going to get into some top 25 sleepers.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So, looking at the top 25 lists that have been coming out, I typically go by Sports Illustrated list. It fluctuates from time to time, and it's always good to look at it again and again before the season starts, just because, it doesn't officially come out until way later on down the line. But it's always nice to check it out, especially after recruiting season and all that. So, factoring the recruits and people leaving, guys leaving their jobs for other jobs, and guys entering the NFL draft, it is always nice to look at the top 25 list. So, from the top 25, what I see, I like to look at the kind of the below the top 10 to see who can sneak into the top 10. And maybe even to the top 5 or 4, potentially, depending on how their season goes and what they do and what kind of the route is to take. So, first team I'm interested in looking at is a team that we talked about a little bit earlier last week, was Cincinnati, because they got to keep their head coach, who has won 22 games in their past 2 seasons. So, Luke Fickle, still kind of messing with that that one. He's still the coach of the Bearcats, and they have a lot of optimism to be had there for winning 22 games in their past 2 seasons and really sticking themselves back into the conversation as being a top 25 program. And they've really turned it around. And they did lose a running back in Michael Warren that did run for nearly 3,000 yards for 3 seasons, and he's trying to go to the NFL. But honestly, running back, like I say all the time, running backs can, I don't like to say they're replaceable, but their production can be compensated for with other guys. If they get injured, they get traded or go missing. They may not be as talented, but it's much easier to replace a running back than it is to replace a pass catcher or a guy who throws the football, especially. So Cincinnati should be able to do some things, and they have their quarterback returning, Desmond Ridder, and a more solid defense. So there'll be things around him to be successful and for their head coach to continue the success that they already had. Right now, they're ranked 12th on this list. So, I expect them to continue to build themselves up. And they're below Minnesota, who honestly Minnesota can do a lot of different things with their roster. I'm looking at them as well, but their season last year was so interesting as they had a lot of upsets that they won and things like that. And it was a big season, but they lost a lot of guys on the defense, and they're going up against kind of a gauntlet a little bit. So they'll have 4 straight home games, and then they'll play Maryland, which, gives them a chance to be 5-0 before they play Wisconsin and then Michigan in consecutive games in October. And then they continue to avoid Ohio State and Penn State in, cross-divisional play. So Minnesota is one of those teams that can sneak up on you, but I'm not sure if they have the talent this year. And last year seemed to be their time to, I guess, shine, so to speak. And maybe that time has passed them. Maybe it's Cincinnati's turn. So we'll have to wait and see. Not to forget to mention that their conference really is not that strong. The only, teams, I should say, that you really have to look at majority of the time are that could sneak up on you is Houston and Memphis. Those 2 guys typically, and Tulane. Tulane can definitely be a bit of a challenge considering where they're at. So we'll just have to see what they look like. Auburn. Now, Auburn is a team that I believe has the potential to really jump some teams just because of their placement in their conference. So they play in the SEC, of course, so they'll have no problem playing a bunch of high-ranked, high-talented football programs. So Gus Malzahn has a ton of returning and maturing offensive weapons and a ton of holes to fill in the defense that, that's usually good. So if they can score, that's something that they need to do in order to supplement that defense if it's not as up to par as it used to be. And then if their quarterback, Bo Nix, makes some strides towards, kind of a wishy-washy freshman season, they could really try and get there. They'll play Alabama and play LSU in the West. But those games come real later. So Alabama will have to really, really make a name for themselves and really win. They'll probably have to win out, honestly, go undefeated to really get a chance. And then they play LSU, and then they play Alabama afterwards. So they'll have kind of a large opportunity to make some noise in the top 25 this year. And like always, Auburn is that team that sometimes they'll be ranked outside, or they'll be ranked maybe 10 or 11, and then they'll just keep winning and winning and winning, and then they'll miracle stuff, and then they'll do kick six stuff, and all of a sudden they're in the top 4 or wherever the case may be. So when you look at it from that perspective, they're just a team that I never like to count out. Because they play everybody so hard, and you can say what you want about Gus. He's a hell of a football coach, so you can't really hold anything against him, and honestly, you can't really hold him to too much. You can't hold too much for him sometimes. It's kind of a mixed bag with Gus, but you typically know what you're getting into when you do decide to sign up on the Gus train. So I think I'll be one of those guys on the train this year. I think they have a pretty good lane for themselves to make it there. I don't know if they'll do anything if they do get there, or even if they'll get past the 5th spot, because the top 4 are fairly strong, and the top 5, honestly, are pretty strong. So it's Clemson, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. So that's pretty much almost exact from last year. And then behind is Penn State, Oregon, Oklahoma, Florida, Notre Dame, and then LSU. So actually, we're going to take a break in a little bit, and we're going to get into who are pretending to be in that top 10. By pretending, I mean when it's all said and done, they're going to end up not being in the top 10, or they're not going to have as good of a season as you would predict, or even they're not going to be in the top 4. Or maybe if they don't handle their business early, they can definitely ruin their chances of being where they need to be. So as a sneak peek, I can give you a quick little example. I don't think Notre Dame will be in the top 10. And that's because Notre Dame will find a way to mess themselves up. They'll lose a game that they're not supposed to, or their strength of schedule will not be strong enough to get themselves through. And the voters will see that, and they'll finally stop giving Notre Dame the benefit of the doubt, because we keep doing it with teams like them and Oklahoma, and it has not worked out. There. That's an example. So let's go ahead and take that break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so we're going to get into the top 25 pretenders. So what do I mean by that? Like I said, alluded to before the end of the last segment, we're going to look at guys inside the top 10 who have potential to fall out, and especially guys in the top 4 who potentially may have a chance to have a little bit of slippage and may not reach their full potential that they should based off of status, returning players, and bringing in talent. So like I said earlier, the first, I guess, team that I look at probably are the two bottom in the top 10, which is Notre Dame and unfortunately LSU. After winning a national championship, LSU has probably been the most gutted team I've seen that went to go win a national championship because in recent years, guys who win national championships typically try and repeat because they keep more talent than they lose, and they have a lot more younger guys lead, especially their quarterback, because I think their quarterbacks are the most important into making national title runs, just because if you have a quarterback who can be otherworldly or next level in the college football sense of the word, and they can create plays and make something happen for you when it looks like the defenses are getting a little bit too strong and that coordinators are going left and right at each other, throwing the kitchen sink. You need a guy that can really make it happen for you. And for them, Joe Burrow was all of that in a bag of chips. And then when you have a passing game coordinator like Joe Brady, who was all that in a bag of chips as well, it's really hard to replace. Not to mention they lost like 10 underclassmen. So it's going to be really, really, really tough for LSU to find that magic that they had beforehand. And it's going to be really tough, especially if they have a transfer or if Miles Brennan can do it. But they do have Jamar Chase and Terrence Marshall, who are certified monsters to catch the football. But their defense requires a lot of players to be added because they lost a lot on the defensive side of the ball because they lost they lost a lot of players to draft. So you know what they are. They're in the SEC West. It's a tough division. It's going to be tough for them to climb the mountain, but they have the teams and the programs that they face to put them in position to get up there and stay in the top 10 or even get into the top 4 if the season goes like they would hope. But many people predict that it's not going to go their way that way. But it's going to be a tough uphill battle for LSU this year. So if it was me, I'd still keep celebrating the national championship win because once the season gets going and we're strapping our chin straps and putting on the shoulder pads, may look a little bit different. Notre Dame, number 9, who they play Clemson at home and Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. So that alone, that Clemson game is going to tell me a whole lot about Notre Dame. And they're going to play USC and then Pittsburgh. And, Pittsburgh likes to upset people. I just don't know, man. I'm not sure about Brian Kelly. I think he's a good coach, but I don't know if he has enough to push himself inside the top 4. And if he does, I don't know if it matters because the top 4 right now are just really, really strong, and they look like the 4 that anybody else should have, really. The Fighting Irish, they recruit very, very well, so I'll give them that. They'll always have talent coming there. They're one of the more storied programs in college football history, one of the more supported, groups in all of sports, fans everywhere across the world, and they have an atmosphere like no other. So, to me, I just don't see it, but I can understand why, being in the top 10 would seem plausible. I just don't think whenever they do face Clemson, that might be the dagger that ends it. So, looking forward, we have Oklahoma at 7, and I don't think they are a pretender. I think Lincoln Riley will have whoever is the quarterback, really, really, who's Spencer Rattler, by the way, who anybody, I put Lincoln Riley's faith in whoever quarterback he has, and it then comes into my faith. So I believe whoever he has a quarterback will be good because he's that good of a coach for quarterbacks. But he won't have CeeDee Lamb to throw to, and Oklahoma is not a big defensive team in the first place, but they do lose their leading tackler, but they do have some experienced players that do come back. They are the best in the Big 12 until proving otherwise, and the best in the Big 12 isn't good enough to compete for a national title until proven otherwise, essentially. So that's really the bottom line. Is we saw it last year. We saw it a bit the year before, or not the year before, but the year that they went and faced Georgia. It's not it. It doesn't give them enough. They just don't get enough talent, or they don't have the coaching, and they get decimated. They got decimated last year, and it was not pretty. So you just can't. It's honestly, I mean, it would be pretty bad if they had them out of the top 10, but I wouldn't blame somebody for having Oklahoma out of the top 10 early on just because of the performance and, losing players. I think one team that might have a chance to fall out of the top 4. So I'll just put this out here. I think Georgia is the one team that traditionally you always have to be worried about because they always bring in good recruits. Their recruiting classes are always in the top 2 or 3, and usually they're not 3. So Georgia always recruits well. They have great offensive line talent. Kirby Smart's a really good coach. However, sometimes they just find a way to mess it up. They find a way to not live out to their potential. And, people think that they can be the next LSU. But I'm telling you, guys in Athens, people who go to the school, people who really care about Georgia football, they're getting a little bit worried about Kirby Smart and the way he handles things down there in Athens. I would be really, really concerned how Georgia comes out. If they look like they are going to whoop and tail and they're going to take names and really bring it all from game 1 all the way to the last game of the season, then I'll stand corrected. However, it's really hard for me to see that because they haven't shown to be able to really withstand the pressure of trying to win all games and really stand with the best of them when it comes to it. And, sometimes things aren't fair. Like last year, I don't think Georgia was horrible. They did run up against LSU at an all-time level of outclassmanship comparative to the rest of the league or the rest of the nation. LSU was an otherworldly team last year, and they did a lot better than other counterparts, so did better than Oklahoma against them. You can argue they did better than Clemson in the national title game to some eyes, but in reality, Georgia lost and they got out of the top 4. And, they can find themselves in similar situations again if they don't bring their 100% A game, because I'll be honest, I don't think they brought their 100% A game that game either. But that is it for the top 25 analysis for now. We always go back and revisit and look at things if things change. So we're going to take another break and we're going to talk about some draft guys and just see where guys are going to be landing according to projections and stuff.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so you know how the college football cycle generally goes. It's, spring training, or not spring training, but, spring practice, spring football. Then we go into more training in the off season. And then we get into August, and that's when the ball starts to roll. We start to get some games going. Then the games play, and then we get to the national title, and then after the national title, or we should say bowl season, and then national title season, and then it goes to a lull, and then we start to hear some declarations, some guys who are saying they're going to the draft, and then, of course, the draft then happens. So it's nice to look at draft boards and mock drafts and see where some of our favorite college football players from the previous season will probably end up. So let's look at CBS Sports, one of their latest mock drafts, and they have a lot of familiar names up there that seem to be reasonable, and we're just going to get into them. So Joe Burrow, who is prospect ranked second, so essentially that is the draft stock is second as a prospect from his position. Well, not from his position, but they put position and they put skill level and all that stuff into account, and then they say his position rank is first, so he should be drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals. Say it's an easy pick. He's the best quarterback in the class, and the Bengals have a need for a young player to build around. And I agree mostly with that assumption. The Bengals do need a young player to build around, especially since they've already been stated to say that they're going to trade their previous young builder as a quarterback. But I can't say that he is the best quarterback in the class, just because it was really a tight race before Tua's injury. I think he's one of the best. He might be the second best. Or he's definitely the second best. I shouldn't say he might be. He's definitely the second best. I don't know if he's the best. I don't know if he'll have a better career than Tua. I don't know if Tua will have a better career than Joe Burrow. But I do know I saw a lot of Tua before I saw a lot of Joe Burrow as far as the skill level, and I know who was more consistent. But Joe Burrow is on his confidence and his flair, the way his swagger as a quarterback is kind of just is unparalleled in the rest of the class. So it's very, very easy for the Bengals to make this pick. I don't think it's a bad pick. Honestly, you couldn't go wrong with either one, in my opinion. But he is the real deal, I feel like. Pick number 2 is Chase Young, which shouldn't be any surprise. Jack Del Rio is their defensive coordinator there, and that means that Washington is looking to really, 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 really push it to another level. Getting this edge rusher he's 6'5", 265. He's huge. Essentially, that's 20 pounds and I guess 1 inch away from Zion Williamson. That is insane. Maybe that means Zion is, it's insane that Zion is playing basketball at that height. It's not insane that Chase Young is playing at that height and weight football-wise, but, and the way he runs, like his size and his speed and agility and power make Chase Young he's such a strong candidate. They say he could be better than both Bosa's, which says a lot because both of those Bosa's have won Rookie of the Year. And one of them was just in a Super Bowl. So you can't go wrong with that pick. We're going to go down a bit and see that Tua is projected to go 5 to Miami, which is interesting as he's the 3rd ranked prospect, but he will be in his position. He's 2nd ranked. So it's just, the other two are the Giants and the Lions, who would be before the Dolphins in this draft. So really, it would seem like it would make sense. If he clears out medically, it'd be good for them. I guess in reality, the tanking that they did early on in the season did work out for them, and it'd be interesting because the Chargers, who have pick number 6, is projected to take Justin Herbert, and Phillip Rivers has already moved on, and they can get a quarterback for the future, but they also could look to get one in free agency, and they could take a quarterback in free agency and keep Justin Herbert on ice while he learns the quarterback position from somebody who knows how to play it. Could have been Phillip Rivers, but who knows? Then number 7 is Javion Kinglaw. He's a defensive line out of South Carolina. 6'6", 310. It's a big guy. So they were really bad against the run last year, and he's the type of player who can fix that. And it just seems like a perfect fit for them. But it'd be really interesting to see if how they handle their quarterback situation in Carolina. Just because Joe Brady, Joe Burrow, maybe they can make a trade. I don't know. But that's kind of that's not really looking at anything super crazy. In reality, though, South Carolina kid is going to be a nice little pickup for Carolina. Going further into the draft, you see Isaiah Simmons out of Clemson for the 8th pick. That guy is a Swiss Army knife of a linebacker. One of the more interesting guys in the draft, in my opinion. He's prospect ranked 5th, and he can kind of do it all. And he's a guy that Arizona looks to get out of defenders, and he can really help that defense really hold it down. Jeff Okudah, the Jets, pick 11. That's insane if they can get their hands on it. 6'1", 200 pounds. He's a corner that, honestly, was the best corner in the country. And then, the Jets need a good cornerback that help pair up with already shining star in their secondary with Jamal Adams coming out of LSU. Jeffrey Jeudy is picked 12th by the Raiders, which would be nice for them as they definitely need a guy on the outside to help in their passing game. And people say, it could be him or CeeDee Lamb, because CeeDee Lamb goes to Indianapolis, who I would be extremely interested in for fantasy purposes if he goes to Indianapolis. But there's a lot of different guys coming out that we see. The Falcons would take an edge rusher, which makes sense. It'd be from Alabama, Terrell Lewis. I'm still looking for a few more big names. Grant Delpit to the Patriots for the 23rd pick. That'd be interesting. And, that looks like a pretty interesting draft, man. The Saints look to take a receiver out of Colorado, which is awesome because we just talked about Colorado. So he's a fifth ranked in this position, and he could be a guy that can really help. He's 6'2", 220. The Saints haven't had a lot of good history in drafting wide receivers, but it could be it's definitely a position that they need to look at and be mindful of. And with Drew Brees coming back, which would appear to be his final season probably, it would be best to stack up on all the potential that you can get. All right, so that was just a little bit of a mock draft. We'll look at that as the draft season continues and when we get into the combine and stuff like that as well, just to see how our favorite guys end up doing in those drills and pro days and other discussions like that. But we're going to take our final break here, and then we're going to get into our last segment.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so for the final segment of the podcast, I wanted to look at the idea of the best. And I don't mean as in, I guess, the best program of all time. I mean, we'll go over some of the most storied franchises of all time. But I just mean as in the idea of best, because best in sports means a whole lot. It runs the 24/7 media cycle all the time. It's at least talked about once a week on somebody's network. Who is the best at what? Who is the greatest? Who is the winningest? Who defined the sport? Who is the face of the sport? Who had the biggest legacy? Who took the largest legacy hit? Why is it so important to be the best? Well, I guess because in general, sports are generally a competition, and there's so many good people in sports. However, at the end of the day, there can only be one best, and there can only be, to some eyes, there only can be one GOAT. Sometimes the greatest of all time is generational. It's hard to put different generations against each other, especially in sports, because there's so many trends in sports happen, just like fashion. Things get in fashion, so to speak, and things go out of fashion. So right now we're in a passing tirade. So, it's hard for people to put up against guys from, the 50s and look at what they're doing now and be like, oh yeah, this definitely makes sense for why certain players are better than what they are now, and the passing stats are out of control, and people try to aggregate stats and to compensate for older players who didn't play in the past happy era, especially for quarterbacks. And then it makes you think about how running backs are now, and then you look at guys like Jim Brown, who were the stats that they put up, or he put up in his career, is just astronomically insane. And you look at people like Reggie Bush in college, who are just unreal video game jukey, and Michael Vick and things like that. And you just go around and you look at it. But this is more about a conversation about programs. So, the winningest programs in college football history. How do you, rank these? You got to look at wins as programs, and of course titles. And I don't know if bowl games should count. Well, I suppose bowl games should count, but in reality, it'll just end up being, kind of like a commodity at some point, because if you are that good, you'll generally win your bowl games anyway. and they kind of just become kind of like party favors, essentially, at least to me. But according to 24/7 Sports, as far as wins or they go by list by number of total wins. So Michigan has 962 total wins and 4 national titles. Ohio State has 924 wins and 6 national titles. Alabama has 916 wins and 12 national titles. Texas has 916 wins and 4 national titles. Notre Dame has 908 wins and 8 national titles. Oklahoma has 908 wins and 7 national titles. And Nebraska has 902 wins and 5 national titles. And then, Penn State, USC, Tennessee fill out the rest. And it's kind of just insane how some teams are kind of not nearly as relevant as they used to be, considering looking at the win totals and stuff like that. Nebraska, they get wins quite a lot, but I don't know when the last time Nebraska won a national title. Oklahoma, of course, is still relevant, but I don't know when they haven't won a national title in some years. Texas hasn't won since a decade, more than a decade. Notre Dame hasn't been to the national title since they got embarrassed by Alabama. And it's also interesting to see Texas with so many wins. How Alabama has as many wins as Texas, and Alabama has been on a crusade for a better half a decade, and then some. And Texas has kind of been kind of wishy-washy at times, and they haven't really found that guy to bring them over the edge again. Michigan, they just have a lot of wins, man. They have literally, essentially, nearly 20-something plus more wins than Ohio State. Ohio State, of course, has been extremely relevant of time. Michigan has really lacked a lot of elite level success since 2004, and they finished inside the AP 10 once under Harbaugh, despite 3 10-win seasons, and they've lost 4 bowl games since, and they haven't beaten Ohio State, and they're slowly gaining ground for that number 1 spot. Nick Saban is 68, which is hard for me to consider because he just looks like he doesn't age. He signed another multi-year deal in 2018 and has no plans on retiring. And he doesn't know what he's going to do if he stops coaching football, or as he wasn't. He's quoted to say, "I really enjoy what I'm doing. I really do. I love the players. I love the relationships you have with players. I like being part of a team. I keep looking at the next challenges. And to me, those challenges come each year. In trying to rebuild our team, losses that you have, guys that you are going out early for the draft, I'm excited about being able to do this." And it just makes me think about, history in a sense. A lot of these teams on this list aren't nearly as relevant. Like Tennessee has been a kind of a laughingstock of the SEC for a little while because they just can't seem to get it together. But they're one of the most storied programs in college football. USC hasn't been nearly as, relevant in time, even though in the early 2000s they were a really big powerhouse, almost pulled off the three-peat in college football. And then, Penn State is a really, really big-time conference that a lot of people care about. Big-time program that a lot of people care about, and they still have relevance today. But it's just interesting to look at, history. You never know. Some guys, some programs really had it going on back then, and they were really strong powerhouses, and you forget that relevance and winning can be so so sudden, and we get into recency bias a lot, and we forget where teams come from and how teams were back in the day, and we forget how winning can be so fleeting. So you never want to take things for granted. So all you Alabama fans, all you Clemson fans, Ohio State fans, remember, you're just one retirement, you're never too far away from becoming Texas or Tennessee or anything like that, because you never know where your program's going to go year after year. But, don't take stuff for granted. Winning is really hard. So with that being said, that will be the end of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Thank you all for listening. Please don't forget to rate and review us on whatever platform you do choose to listen to the podcast. And don't forget to share us out with your friends and family and other college football fans of the like. Please use our social media handles for that. So follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, and our Twitter in order to, spread the word. Spread us out. Appreciate you guys for listening. Catch you guys next week. This is Ethan heading out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.